All right, a very good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's What Now, What Next. And we have a fantastic session installed for all of you tonight, and we'll be talking all things higher education and a future job market. But before we do that, just a couple of things. These sessions have been really, really important. Obviously, we're moving things forward here in Victoria. Some would like it moving quicker than others, and we want to see very much Victoria opening up, getting themselves ready, ensuring that we have people back at work, we're seeing more kids back at school, and ultimately restarting Victoria. The sessions that we've been doing is all about an alternative roadmap. It's about ensuring that we have all the things that Victoria's been really good at and all the things that Victoria can be good at, positioned in a way going forward. So last week we spoke about the health and wellness industry and the kinds of challenges that all of us should be really concerned about when it comes to our own health and wellness. We've spoken about schooling, particularly some of the challenges for kids at primary school. We also spoke about the events industry, and we gave a lot of really good examples about the different types of events, whether it be the large, big corporate events, all the way through to the types of weddings and private events that we all know and love. So tonight is all about reshaping higher education and training for the future job market. And it's a really, really important conversation because we know that many of you that are on the chat tonight, many of you would be at university, many of you are thinking of going to university or to some other kind of further education. And ultimately, you're looking about what the job market may have to offer. There's certainly been lots of challenges this year, and that will be something that we'll be talking about. With us tonight, we'll be talking to Simon McKeon, the Chancellor of Monash University, Australian of the Year in 2011. Simon is also the Non-Executive Director of Rio-Tinto, Non-Executive Director of National Australia Bank, and former Executive Director of the Macquarie Group. Very good evening to you, Simon. And also, and I'll come back to Simon in a minute, also we have Morris Miselowski. Morris, I had right when we started these chats at the beginning of COVID, I think back in March, we started to talk about some of the challenges, some of the issues. Morris has spent over 30 years talking about the future and what the future has to offer. Morris and I, prior to politics, had a number of these conversations looking at things, whether it be the retail market, whether it be, again, universities. And Morris certainly reminds me that we even spoke to the Western Bulldogs about players wearing wearable devices before wearable devices are now being worn. So there you go. Sometimes a futurist gets it right. Sometimes they get it wrong. They certainly won't be able to tell you the tax lotto numbers, but they will be able to tell you some of the trends that are happening at the moment. So we look forward to hearing from Morris as well. So before we kick this off tonight, I just wanted to bring up another slide, and I'm going to get Simon's thoughts on this during our conversation. But it's very timely because this was this morning's Age that said thousands of university graduates to face some of the worst job market in 30 years. So we've got 130 university students will graduate this year. We've got a tougher job market that we've seen since the 1990s recession. And ultimately, what we need to do to ensure that the graduates of today become the great opportunities in terms of jobs of tomorrow, and how we can be able to bring that together. And we've got a fantastic guest with us tonight, Simon McKeon, who's spent years in industry, knows industry really well, and obviously now has a very strong involvement in the university sector as well. Welcome again, Simon.
Great to be with you, David. Well done organising this.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to kick this off because we've got probably a lot of people on the chat. Some go to universities, many don't, and would probably asking you, you're the Chancellor of Monash. What is a Chancellor? What does the Chancellor's role actually involve? And how did you get yourself into this gig?
Thanks, David. look, Chancellor sounds very highfalutin sort of name. It's simply chairman of the board. So part-time, I have a council or a board, half of whom are selected by the government, half are selected by the university itself. And essentially like a board, we look at the things that are high level strategy, budgets, ensuring that we have outstanding management. We do not run the university. That's left for others day in, day out.
And you mentioned to me earlier, in terms of you getting the gig, that it was. Tell everyone at home about that.
Yeah,
Really
look, it was interesting, David. I was incredibly privileged to serve as the chair of CSIRO for several years, and then that period finished in 2015. And very shortly after, I think Prime Minister Turnbull came into power, and one of the very first things he did was to select a new chief scientist for Australia. And the then Chancellor of Monash, Alan Finkel, a fantastically appropriate appointment, not only as a Chancellor of Monash, but then our chief scientist. He was Malcolm's preferred choice. He then left, of course, the university fairly abruptly, and talk about the door just opening at the right time. It was an incredibly, lucky opportunity for me, especially since whilst I did go to the University of Melbourne, I'm a southeast person. I grew up in Dandenong. In fact, I saw the paddocks where Monash ultimately was built as a young 4-year-old going into the city once every couple of months with my mum. She pointed out that's going to be a university. I had no idea what university was going to be, but I remember the old paddocks.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating story. I wanted to kick things off, and obviously, things have been pretty tough this year, and we're going to focus a lot of our discussion around hope and the future. So, and Morris will be able to provide some additional insights from his perspective along the way. Can I remind everybody on the chat too, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll call on you in about 20 minutes or so once we're through this initial introduction. But I wanted to ask you, my opening comments, particularly around that age article. It's obviously pretty concerning for kids that are just coming through and graduating. I know my son, who's on the chat at the moment, he's first-year university student at Monash, studying arts law, and very, very excited to have his first year going to Monash, and hasn't spent a day on campus. It's all been via Zoom chats and whatnot. So, tell us a little bit about those challenges, and maybe more specifically with where do we need to be in terms of overcoming the kinds of issues that article mentions about the job market?
Yeah. Well, I think firstly, David, as far as the university is concerned, we simply have to do the very, very best we can, having regard for these incredibly changed circumstances, which happened really quickly. So, I think we have a fabulous management group at the university, very experienced. And, for the last 6 months, I've obviously been working incredibly hard, but I think by and large, doing the right things. They transitioned incredibly quickly to an entire online system. I'm not sure how your son's been coping with that, but we research that. We get our stats on that every month. And it does seem, for such a radical transformation of the teaching program, it has gone extraordinarily well. And there's been changes just everywhere, from obviously the social distancing on campus itself. We established a student hardship fund. We've had to think very carefully about remote examination supervision. I mean, there's just no area that's gone unscathed. Probably the one thing we have done is put a pretty big halt on new buildings for obvious reasons. A university, we've probably got the largest suite of buildings in Victoria, on that massive Clayton site. And so a lot of that's been paused. But everything else has been in high gear, and everything has changed. But to your point about who this is really important for, being the students, and particularly whether your son or the 70,000 other students who are at Monash and have their lives before them, I can't start to imagine, because my life, frankly, looks so straightforward compared to coming out of this pandemic. But you mentioned the word hope before, and I want to seize upon that, because there's 7 or 8 billion people on this earth. I would rather be nowhere else than here as we navigate through these uncertain times. Yep, we've closed our borders to a large degree. We are trying as a nation to, get this pandemic under relative control. Other nations not have given up, but they're doing it in a very different and liberal way. I happen to be of the view that even though it's really tough at the moment, that will mean that the longer term for us, we'll come out of this, I actually think, in relative terms, better than just about any other country. Probably New Zealand might be doing even a bit better than us. But, in this part of the world, an island continent, so much to be feeling fortunate about. I think we just have to really take a deep breath over the next year or two. And that will be very hard on young graduates scratching their heads saying, what the heck is this world going to offer me? And I don't have the magic answers to that at all. But what I would say is, I think that play the long game. Don't just freak out. Just understand that everyone is trying to do the right thing here, particularly governments with their fiscal measures, etc. And all I know is that I think that we're in the best place on earth to navigate this tough era.
So I just want to touch further in terms of the delivery model. So what's your view in terms of, universities have always had a bit of a hybrid model of face-to-face and online. This year's purely been online. Do you think things will revert back to that hybrid model, or do you think there'll be more?
Yeah, it's a really good question, David. One of the big learnings I had when I became Chancellor was the importance of that physical envelope that we've got all those buildings on. You would have thought nowadays that online, which is absolutely massive, there's no doubt about that, but would actually come at a massive cost equally. Do we need a campus anymore? And my eyes were really opened when everyone I asked that question of, who are what I'd call professionals, said, no, interestingly, whilst at 10:30 on a typical morning, we've got lots of students lying in bed with their laptops, doing their work. They're not actually here. But there's never, ever been an era before where the students actually want to come as well and socialise. And I scratched my head, this is sort of 4 or 5 years ago when I was trying to understand all this. It was a strange phenomenon. People wanted to privately study at home, but they also wanted that socialisation experience. So to answer your question, the years 2020 and I suggest 2021 will go down as years where we were socially isolated. But our campus isn't going anywhere anytime soon. In fact, there's significant demand for good space, both education, research, and students just mixing and growing up as young adults, spending time together. There will be a bit of a change. I think that there's so much technology that we're now using actively, which means that we can do things more remotely. So that's a permanent change. But university campuses aren't going anywhere soon. They're still vitally regarded or needed.
So I wanted to pick up the issue around international students. So international students, I think, is one of Victoria's largest exports, and has been something that we've been very, very fortunate in terms of what that does in terms of the broader education mix and the investment in education. Obviously, that's been impacted upon. Can you tell us your views on that, and how quick we're likely to bounce back from that, particularly the likes of, say, China?
Well, To be clear, it's actually been our largest export sector in this state. Third largest in the country. We don't have iron ore or coal. So it's our biggest, and it is really massive. We're the biggest state in terms of this activity. This year is an interesting year because actually most of the students that were enrolled were physically here before the shutters came down. So, in terms of our finances, we're actually coping fine this year. Not quite the salad days of last year, but they're not bad. Next year's the tough year. And it's even worse than that, David, because two of our biggest competitors in this market, and it is a market, are the US, which is a clear number one, and the UK, which Australia surpassed. We became the number two education export earner, if you like, surpassing the UK over the last 12 months before the pandemic came. And interestingly, those two countries, which have been more severely affected by the pandemic than us, have kept their borders open to international students. And of course, they have they've just gone through their summer. They have a new academic year that's just started over the last couple of months. And there's no doubt they've stolen a significant part of our market for next year. That's a reality. Can't do much about that at this point. But I go back to what I said a couple of minutes ago, that, when the borders do open here in Australia, whether it's the middle class of China or 25 other important nations, they will look to Australia, I'm convinced, through a lens that says, wow, pretty tolerant nation, certainly for China, pretty much in our time zone, has a good, excellent healthcare system, has handled the pandemic well. I think we emerge out of this awful era stronger in relative terms to our two major competitors than when we went in. All we have to do is to be able to represent that our tertiary education sector is as strong as it was beforehand. And I think they will come in very large numbers. But, anyone running a university at this point has to, tighten their belt for calendar 2021. Tough year.
That's a tough one. Now, I just wanted to move our conversation to the boardroom, because obviously your work with the banking sector and the mining sector as well, just a couple to name a few. Have you noted changes there? I mean, I know certainly friends of mine that work in the banking sector haven't been in the office, obviously, like many, since March.
Yeah.
We heard things the other day about Westpac potentially leasing one of their buildings in the city and not returning to that building. I mean, do you see that kind of thing happening, and where do you see the opportunity in the finance and more in the kind of large corporates going forward?
Yeah. Well, David, obviously it depends in what sector the corporate operates, because, every sector is navigating this differently. Some are doing it really tough, airlines and retail, physical retail. Others are actually having a boom that they've never seen before, the likes of which, certainly CSL, our largest vaccine producer, etc. So it depends who you are and where you are. But there are going to be some phenomenon that have a very permanent change. You mentioned before about CBD buildings. NAB has 3 massive buildings all up and down Bourke Street. And it's very simple. I think we only need one of them in the future. Definitely, we'll certainly keep 2, but it's hard to see how a third can in any way be used by NAB. And, I have a view that the CBD is still going to be an incredibly important place for, special Victorian events, sporting, cultural, etc., etc. But overall, the workplace appetite for space is going to continue to decline very significantly, and actually be replaced by places like Frankston and Dandenong and, all those outer satellite places where people, in fact, the real estate agents are saying already that there's interesting demand for commercial sites in those centres.
So I wanted to just pick you up on that one as well, in that I know that you've got and one of your other hats that you wear, and the numerous hats that you wear, is chairing an organisation in the Greater Southeast. And could you talk specifically, so, you know, the Frankston's, Dandenong, some of the growth corridor areas, particularly about, you know, industry development, job market, future opportunities for those areas? Where do you see things going there? And obviously some of the challenges for them at the moment, because, you know, many of those businesses would be struggling, no doubt.
Absolutely. Look, it's a massive area we're talking about, the Greater Southeast, 8 different councils or shires, right down to the end of Mornington Peninsula, out to Casey, Cardinia, out to Monash, Frankston, Kingston. Big area. And an area full of diversity. It's got absolutely everything in it. Enormous dormitory use, of course, and then, you know, the bulk of Melbourne's manufacturing, enormous service sector, tourism, agriculture, you know, the list goes on and on. And you know, you ask, gosh, where are the challenges starting? I mean, we've only got an hour. It is massive, but I think the important thing about Greater Southeast Melbourne is that it is a very, very effective way to communicate to both state and federal governments. You know, some people say we're over-governed in this land. You know, we've got 3 levels of government. Well, I don't care too much about that debate because we have what we have. What I know is that there's a big gap between an individual council and the next level up, state government, let alone federal government. And to create that effective voice, which the guys down at Geelong did a long time ago, and full marks to them. They've often had a dysfunctional council, but they've had a very effective, broad community voice. Same in the western suburbs, love them or hate them. The people around Footscray, Sunshine, all that greater area now, very well organised in terms of regional representation. We have not been so well organised over this side of town. Yeah. And there are some important needs, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's getting, you know, there's a very long list of things that we need, and we just need to advocate well. And it goes back to the point I made before. There's no shortage of things to ask for, and the more that they are sensible, well backed up with good research, the better it will be for this region to get through the pandemic out the other side.
So I want to finish with one last question, because I'm not even going to talk about the challenges and the issues with Victoria. You know, we know there's plenty of challenges there. You know, we might touch on that later. But I want to segue of all of this together. You do a lot in the industry sector. You're doing a lot in the education space. Where the rubber hitting the road, how can we ensure that there is a stronger cohesion between universities and industry to ensure the kids that are going to university come out job ready and ultimately have a future that's connected to a future job market?
Really important question, David. And I think here in Australia, and not just Monash, but the whole of Australia, I'd sort of rate us at about 6 out of 10. And it's the fault of both the university and the industry sectors. And at the end of the day, you know, I can criticize why it hasn't happened. I don't really care about that. The fact is we're in 2020 and there's never been a more important time for those 2 massive sectors to work really closely together. Part of it's, you know, going to come from sensible government encouragement, if I can put it that way. But you know what? More of it is simply going to occur by each of those sectors recognizing that they need to be much more intent on working out what the other gives. You know, I do straddle both sides, and I'm not going to blame one or the other. The fact is the ball is in both courts. And all I do know is the success stories of when industry does sit down. You know, we've got a $30 million building at Clayton that's been put up by Woodside. You know, great teaching centre in engineering, absolutely fantastic. But Woodside also gets its pound of flesh of the extraordinary research that's going on, in that place. So, it's a forward thinker. We just need more of those examples. The US is full of them. Europe has a lot more than we do. We're just a little bit backward. We are. But I'm quite sure that the more we talk about the good things that are coming out of the various collaborations we have, not enough, the more others will get it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. Opportunity waiting to happen. We'll come back to all of that. I want to bring Morris into the conversation now. Good evening, Morris. Great to see you again.
And you. Always good to be on board.
Now, before we get just into the detail, you've been doing a lot since we last spoke. Give us a quick plug in terms of some of the things that Business Futurist has been up to.
Well, lots of things, but really my life's always been about pointing people towards tomorrow and making them comfortable exploring it. In the last 7 or 8 months, gee whiz, there's been a lot to think about and a lot to explore. For me, it's been taking people back to basics. I've a very homespun, which I've always had, belief, and that is that we really in business and in education need to be thinking about the why we do something rather than the how. And that's been the big issue at the moment, that too many of us have done things in a particular way and been reticent to change it. And when this calamity came upon us in February, we were so stuck to the how that it took a lot of us back. It took us a lot of us some time to get back to the why. And the why then leads us on to how we might be able to reimagine and repurpose. So I've been working with industries around the globe, trying to imagine what the world might look like ahead in response to COVID. To Simon's point, what's happened in the world over the last 8 or 9 months has really accelerated everything that was around before. We've really not created anything new. What we have done, though, is create a culture of acceptance where we now have lived, shared experiences that the things that we have rallied against over the last 10 or 20 years can exist, that education can be distributed, that there is not a better or worse place for it to happen. It can be on campus and it can be at home, and we've learnt that experience. It's also retail. There's been this fight always between the physical store and the digital store, and one has hated the other and rallied against it. And you and I have had over a decade of those conversations. When we started all those years ago by simply saying both have to coexist, that there is an opportunity and a place for both. So my life over the last 8 or 9 months has been wonderfully, horribly saying, see, I told you so. And secondly, getting people to the point where they now admit that all is possible. We just have to have a desire for it. So we've reimagined, or I've reimagined education, I've reimagined hospitality, we've looked at tourism and events. I've been through most industries, and you know what? The reality is that as horrible as this period is, and I won't downplay it in any way whatsoever because it is calamitous, the reality is it's temporary. And we will have to suffer through this for a little longer, and the little could be a year or two with a tail end of 2 or 3 years beyond that. There is nothing good again to be said about that, but we shall overcome. We will get past this. And I absolutely categorically agree with Simon that I think we will come out of this in a far better position than we ever did before. I'm sorry for every second we spent in this place getting us to this, but let's make the best of it because we deserve it, and we will in fact win out of this in the medium term.
Perfect. And that's where our conversation really is all about tonight, and where we'll be taking it from here on is all about hope and optimism, and we spoke a lot with that with Simon. I wanted to ask you firstly, and I know you get asked this a lot, but if you've got an 18-year-old sitting there, they're just about to do their VCE exams, they've put down their preferences, they have an opportunity potentially to change their preferences, what would you advise them in the type of course, education, training, what skills do you think that they will need going forward to prepare themselves for a future job market post-COVID?
First thing I need to do is reassure their parents, and that's something I spend a lot of time on. The job market that we are talking about for our children, the future for our children, is nothing like the one we had before. I was sold quite rightly an industrial revolution model where I needed to have one career, and that career, that choice I made going to university was tantamount because I was stuck with it for life. Today's children need a start, not a finish. They need to find what it is that gives them joy, where their skill sets are, where their mind and their soul and their heart takes them. And then we need to help them to start on that journey. The reality is that they will be in the industry until they're about 80 or so. I firmly believe they'll live to 100. They're not going to toil with, and have to sweat for 80 years, but just for the sheer nature of being with other people, of stimulating their mind, they will be employed or they will be active for another 60 or 70 years. So we need to give them the skills that will allow them to grow in directions that we can't, even I can't yet imagine. We need to give them strong foundations. We need to give them surety that they will be able to adapt and to adopt, which is what they've proven for themselves this year. I believe that our students really are not, this is where I kind of fall off from everybody else. And Simon, you may come in and hit me here, and I hope you will. Look, I have issues with STEM. I really do. And that's the overemphasis that we have on it with our education and with our politics. I think STEM, which is science, technology, engineering and maths, is really important, and there's no issue around that. But I sense that we might be going into what we saw in the 1970s and 80s, where we pushed people into universities and took them out of TAFE and stopped teaching people how to use these wonderful things called their hands in connection with their brain. I talk about STEAM instead. And I refer to it as the energy that's going to get us forward. It includes the A for arts, because what our kids are, still answering your question, Dave, what our kids need to do forward is not to learn routine. They need to learn to be imaginative, to be creative. They need to collaborate. They need to work across time zones, across culture. They're the things that are human about them. A lot of the jobs that we have now are routine jobs, and technology will take over in the next year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever time horizon you want. But in that 60 years that they will live, technology will do most of the routine work. What's left for humans is wisdom. We need to teach our kids to be wise, to be able to make good choices, to be able to create, to collaborate, to communicate. So for me, those are the general rules that I talk to my kids and parents about when I'm talking about the future. There are still lots of industries, and we can come to that if you like, lots of industries that we can talk about, but I think it's the mindset that's most important.
So, obviously we're seeing a lot of people that are really struggling at the moment, but we've also seen a lot of people that have pivoted. And these times, that's obviously been the COVID word that we've had over these months.
Yeah.
But
didn't use it 8 months ago, did we?
No, we didn't use pivot at all.
Yeah.
But interesting to see, that some have been able to do it better than others. Where do you see things in terms of the resilient side of this for a young person? And obviously, again, when you're in the here and now, it makes it very, very difficult to kind of look at that. But once a lot of young people have been through this, do you think that will prepare them more for that resilience, that nimbleness that we talk about, the agility to be able to move themselves in and out of jobs, in and out of careers, and as a door shuts, another door may potentially open?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I didn't live through this experience, but the one thing I've heard from the generation that came before, the builders generation, was we went through a war and we had tough times and we knew how to be resilient because of it. Again, I don't like what's caused either of those thinkings and abilities, but to me, this is that lived experience that has taught our next generation firsthand that life isn't always easy, that there are difficulties ahead, and that you will, again, that word that neither of us used before, and I hope we won't use much into the future, we have to pivot. We really have to think about things in a different way. The other thing that this period has taught each and every one of us is that we are responsible for ourselves. The shift comes back to us. That yes, we require government, we require all sorts of people to give us a framework in which to work and to make that easier rather than harder, of course. But the reality is it is up to us. It's why Simon's wonderful teachers were able to go home and start micro universities when they didn't think they could literally the day before. It's where the students learn to learn online because no one taught them how to do it properly before. But yet we've all moved into that space. It's where every small business person that's learning, that's online now, with all of the tragedy and the difficulty, if they were able, found a way forward. Our kids have learnt that now. We have to allow them to continue with it. We also have to stop burdening them with the reality that they are looking for a job in the linear way that I and you were told to do. Perhaps this is the time when we need to give them more leeway. Do we need to go back and start looking at universal basic wage now to help these kids for the next 2 or 3 years? Do we have to push them into a gig economy, or the ability to be able to make income, if it's not from a sole employer, then from a number of sources, and say that's ordinary and acceptable now, and we can move forward with that, not instead of, but as well as everything else that life offers them. Let's start to open up opportunities and normalize them for them. This is not the answer that I want to give, because I would love to say, here are 100,000 jobs, please come and have them. Until we can do that again, we can't leave them out in the cold. We don't have that. Let's start looking at this in a very, very different way. Let's be brave enough to have the discussion that we would have had to have had in 10 or 15 years anyway. Let's have it in 2020.
So one last question for you, and then we'll open it up to the participants. And can I say, anyone that's got a question at the moment, please put it in the chat and we'll endeavour to get to you. I asked the question of Simon in his role of both, his hats of industry and also at the university, how do we get a better connection between them? You and I have spoken for a long time now about having more of a nimble approach to a degree or a training that actually reflects more society, if you like, and where somebody needs to go. How would you have that better connection between industry and education?
Firstly, we've got to stop coexisting, because that's what we do at the moment. We tolerate each other. I'm talking industry and education. Both sees each other as superior and more necessary than the other. And this is me. I'm saying this, so come back and yell at me about this. But I think we need to remember that we are codependent, that we both require each other, that the students of today will go into an industry, and that industry needs to tell education how and where it wants them to do. And likewise, we need to be putting out students that can help industries move forward, because the industry has been doing something for a particularly long period of time. That doesn't make them better or worse. These creative, wonderful new minds are seeing the world in a new way, and we need to give them the opportunity to do that. We also not only need, but it is absolutely relevant now, that, to use Shakespeare's word, that we go through 7 phases of life from birth to death, that our formal education system drops off somewhere around the 3rd or 4th phase, somewhere in our mid-20s, and then we leave people to their own devices moving forward. We now are learners 24/7. If I don't know how to bake a cake or change a tire, I look it up, and in 3 minutes I've watched a video and I'm an expert now. I can teach you everything you needed to know that I didn't know 5 minutes ago. There are ways that we can provide this through a system like a Monash, through an educational system that's formal, that teaches about nano qualifications or in situ qualifications. Again, another conversation for another night. This is where industry and education come together beautifully, because yes, we put together a group of students who are acculturated, who understand the first choice industry that they've made, speak the language, know the basic tools, the basic history, and what it is the industry thinks it needs now. But then we send them out into industry, and industry is aware, as are they, through technology and other sources, what that person needs to upskill them at every moment of every day through the next 30 or 40 years. And there's this beautiful dance that I think that industry, education, and the general public can have moving forward that we will see as ordinary in 10 or 15 years. Again, let's start having the discussion today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to actually having a physical dance too at some point beyond all of this. That would be good.
That wasn't for you and I, though, was it?
No,
I don't think Hayley would like that very much.
All right, I'm going to kick off into a question from the audience. Our first one goes to Patrick.
Hi, Simon and Morris. Thanks for this.
Hey, Patrick.
I'm, as you might notice, a year 12. I'm just finishing. I've got my exams in about a month. And my question is, given that we've had such a truncated year 12 this year, we've all had content cut, we've all lost classes, we've all probably not got the education we would have liked. Do you think that's going to pose a threat for how well equipped myself and others are going to be to get into first year university courses and actually manage them once we get there? And if so, what measures could be taken to mitigate that or to help bridge that gap that's been created?
Great first question, Patrick. Simon, over to you.
Well, I'll start. Look, Patrick, firstly, all the best over the next month. As I said earlier, I had a pretty easy VCE ride when I was your age, and I can't begin to, think about what you're going through. But at the end of the day, you're going to come out of this year with skills that I never needed to have. It's interesting because I am absolutely in agreement with Morris that, I have often advocated for people to do STEM, but, and there's a huge but, I advocate even more strongly for people to do what they feel called to do, which is often not STEM. And the reason I emphasize that in answering your question is that, sure, you're going through a year that no VCE student has gone through for a very, very, very long time. But not only do you come out of that with skills, therefore, that others don't have, most importantly, I think some of those skills lend themselves brilliantly to the world that you're going into. You've had first-hand experience of serious disruption. You are going into a world which values that. If you can deal with disruption, you are valued. As an employer, or certainly associated with companies that do a lot of employing, we're kind of interested in obviously the university degrees and the disciplines that you've studied for, etc. But we're equally, if not more important about, firstly, who you are, how do you operate, what sort of a person are you, what are your values, do you have the knack of inspiring others, leading, etc., etc. How comfortable are you adapting in a constantly changing environment? You might not see these things mentioned in interviews, or we put our CVs together. This is what we studied. These are the marks we got. This is the job we've had previously. But let me tell you that increasingly employers are really looking for the who. Who is the person that we're employing? So I make no apologies for answering your question, Patrick, in the sense that make the most of this goddamn awful era. It can be used to your advantage. Everyone else is in the same boat. I'm not guaranteeing any easy ride out of it, but what I am guaranteeing is that if you take this as simply a wider learning experience than a normal school year, use it positively, it will be noticed. It has to be noticed, because ironically, the sort of things that you are learning are absolutely appropriate to this confusing, fast-changing, disruptive world that you're going to go into.
Thank you. Simon, do you want to add, Morris, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, look, Patrick, I have no idea what you're going through. I mean, I can't and I don't. I understand it from an external viewpoint. The thing that worries me the most is, strangely enough, not about your academia, but the milestone experiences that you've missed out on that I can't give you back or anyone else can. That's really what concerns me the most, because I would love your heart and your soul to be filled of those final year, being with your friends and having that all and whatever else was part of this year. That's what I think, in fact, you will miss out on more long-term than anything else, not having those memories. And perhaps we can find ways to replace or to offer you other ones. The reason I say that is, it's to Simon's point before, and I know this is such a glib thing to say, and there's no way it offers comfort to you whatsoever. But the reality is everybody else in your year is going through this as well. The expectation of next year on you is very different than the expectation of previous years going in. I know it doesn't help you to sit your exam. I know it won't help you to sleep at night. But the reality is that's the world that you're headed into, a world that understands truly what you've gone through. If I had my way, and I don't even think Dave could give me this, but if he could, I would love all of your next year and the year after to be covered in costs. I think that that's what we should do it as a least for society. Everybody in your position moving forward next year, whether they go to university, TAFE, or go into a job or a career, should be subsidised for at least a year and a half, 2 years to help them move forward. To me, that's a pragmatic thing. But again, I can't offer you that, so it doesn't really help saying it, but I'm looking for public voices public places to say that in. You need to be really confident that the fact that you are on this, having this conversation with us, tells me more about who you are and what you will achieve than some damn piece of paper at the end of this year with a mark. And I know your whole life has been geared towards it, and I know how important that ATAR mark is to you. But for somebody who's been down that road, I'm asking you to think about, as Simon said, the humanity inside of you, and take solace from that, and understand next year will be forgiving in some ways. Difficult, but forgiving.
Thank you, Patrick. Great question, and best of luck in your exams. You're a great person. I know the kind of stuff that you've been up to, and we really, really do wish you well. And if I could add just one other thing as well, what it says to me, and I know we say this a lot, there is a really important place for online, and we've learned a whole lot of things in terms of this period, but nothing beats a face-to-face experience and being able to bring people together. And getting back to Simon's earlier point in terms of campuses, and nothing would excite me more than to see kids out at campus getting a real university experience that we all had. Alan, over to you. You've got a question. Alan Grossbard, who's a candidate for the election in Camden. Not that I necessarily give you a plug, but I just have. So over to you. I can't hear you, Alan. No, we've got a problem with your microphone. Try again. Come on and off. Go again. No, we're not hearing you. Sorry, Alan. I don't know what's happened. While you're waiting to ask, you keep talking or playing with your computer. I have got something up in the chat here. And I know you did mention having come from helping run a large national and international companies and now teaching at university. Alan does do some teaching at RMIT. The university management is very much academic orientated with little industry experience. Therefore, found it hard endeavouring getting industry and academia working together is a difficult process. We need more industry expertise in academia. What can be done to incentivise to bring business people to teach at university?
Well, I'm happy to have a go at that. I think it's a really, really good point. And, Morris, it corroborates what Morris said a little while ago, namely that we've got these two massive industries that coexist, or two massive sectors rather, the tertiary sector and industry. It's kind of interesting. Monash recruited a new CFO a couple of years ago, and we had a short list of 4 or 5. There were 4 CFOs, I think, from other universities, and 1 from the private sector, a listed public company. And gee, am I glad we chose that person. The reason I feel awkward is that we do not do it enough. And the question that's just been asked is absolutely on point. In fact, really, when you think about it, having interplay between industry, between the university sector, in all sorts of different ways, we just don't have enough of it. I agree with that. And interestingly, David, the theme tonight is hope. It might take a little while, but as we do live longer, as we work longer, and hopefully that's a good thing rather than a bad thing, I see a lot more hope for people, say, spending part of their time in industry and then actually wanting to, and I know it's a very, very frequently used phrase, but I'll say it anyway, to give back, to do something else other than be in that industry. And the university sector is a brilliant place to give back. Fortunately, we have a number of faculties, not enough though, where much of the teaching, or some of the teaching rather, is done by people that have come from industry. But all I can say is that there's much more work to be done it's interesting. Again, in the US, we see much more of it. It's just the standard thing. Here, it's not nearly so standard.
Yeah.
Simon and Morris will have a go at this as well, but one of the things that we constantly see universities do is it plays the roller coaster, or plays the merry-go-round rather. So they have this focus where they're going to be industry focused. They're going to bring people from industry into universities. They're going to use pracademics, and away we go. And then all of a sudden, the merry-go-round comes full circle, and we then say we've got to be more research focused. We bring more purists in, and we do away with the industry types. How can we get more of that balance?
So for me, I mean, this is a really personal journey. I'm a past academic and have returned to academia in the last year or so. I was appointed industry fellow with Griffith University late last year to do exactly this. And I work with almost 300 researchers in the space of rehabilitation, disability and resilience, who are doing the most extraordinary research. My role with them is to, I mean, this was my language, is to act as interpreter ambassador. Not only to Alan's point, I also think that there is an internal cringe as well that we need to overcome, that there are many people inside the university who don't really understand the language of industry and don't know how to communicate. They don't understand the opportunities that are available for them also, because as all human beings, they are myopic in what they see. They have put together the most incredible research. They have been so focused in one direction for the right reason, with the right heart and soul attached to it, that they often miss out on the other opportunities that are around them. I see research every day that is so wonderful and purposeful for what that person had thought of it for. But I can see another 12, 15, 20, 30 uses for it that would be just as wonderful and just as joyous. So the reality is that we will see more of these opportunities as universities begin to work internally and externally, bring people in to translate, to work with their people, but also work with industry to help them to understand industry. The dance that both of them do, again, that word, not you and I, you and Hayley, but the dance that they both do are very, very different. And we assume they're not. They almost speak different languages. They truly see the world in very different ways. We need translators out there. This is not about necessarily the people within universities, because I know them to be wonderful. The system itself is often not accommodating. To Simon's point, just as an aside, I tried to volunteer my time 2 years ago with a department that I work with at Monash on and off, volunteer my time, and they couldn't find a hole for me to be able to do it. There wasn't a title or an opportunity for me to be able to do what they needed me to do and I wanted to do, but the university structure wouldn't allow it to happen. So I walked away and went elsewhere to offer the same thing to somebody else. Now, this is not an aside. This is not anything untoward about Monash, but it speaks to that inability sometimes to get away from the structure, to see what needs to be done. And it's the freeing up that I think is most imperative that will answer Alan's question, not overnight, but will answer it moving forward in an elegant way.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Thanks, Alan. Sorry we couldn't get the vocals going, but best of luck for the election. Next question to Roger.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right, thank you.
Roger.
Yes, I've been an engineer for about 35, 40 years. I've worked across a number of industries, and I've currently working in the evil and satanic oil and gas business. Now, my question to the academics is, years and years ago, you may remember, you older folks, a show on television called The Inventors.
Oh, yes.
Now, my big problem here is that culturally, I've seen this happen. I think we have a bit of a cultural cringe about making stuff, not so much in a tradie context, but in an engineering inventor context. We've got shows on television that is all about singing voices. We've got shows about lawyers and doctors. But tell me one where you see engineers. Now, no, I guess that's a problem right across the world. But for us, I think it's a special problem. And I want to know what top 3 things would you do to change the culture so that kids are basically more excited about inventing stuff and making stuff. It's not enough to go and get a job. I think as Morris has correctly said, we're going to need to get out there and actually make stuff and invent stuff, and that's creative stuff. I've got a lot to say about STEM, and I've got some special things about that I'd like to talk about, but that's my first question. What would you do if you could do anything in this culture to really fire up our inventive engines, get us all, you know, those of us that are that way inclined, because I think we're crushed down a bit.
Yeah. Roger, congratulations,
Simon.
Yeah, no, you've nailed it. I, as I said right at the outset, think we live in the best country on this planet. However, it's not perfect. And whether we like it or not, we have to own up every now and then and say that. And I say this particularly because, you know what, I'm the perfect candidate who fell through the floorboards on this one. I should have done a science degree or an engineering degree, and I didn't. And you know what was lacking? I mean, it's such a long time ago, you might say it's irrelevant. I don't think it's irrelevant, because we've actually lacked this a culture in this country that I don't think we need to be like Israel, where it's kind of all this way, but we don't have a balance. And you are spot on. Why did that inventor program? I was actually on it once. I can't believe it.
Really?
All the new inventors, and I actually asked the question myself of the ABC 3 years ago, why didn't it continue? And they said, you know the answer, don't you? That not enough people watched it. Now, at the end of the day, there's no magic answer to that. We've just got to own up and acknowledge that we have a cultural deficiency. You said before it happens all around the world. You're wrong. Doesn't happen. It's actually quite, I won't say it's peculiar to Australia, but we're up in the top group, and it pervades right across society. Why do our biggest corporations spend some of the world's lowest amounts on R&D?
Yes.
Why?
Exactly.
Why don't we have, and at the end of the day, you're asking the question, what do you do about it? You're asking a university chancellor who's scratched his head for a long time, desperately, and I do not have the answers, because this is such a huge problem. You know, we had a Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, who went out on a crusade on this and honestly got laughed at after a couple of years. And all I would say is that it's a very complicated, or it's a very difficult answer. But if we're going to be serious about it, it involves a lot of things. Firstly, I think it involves, we need rock stars in this area. We need to, it's not just the Brian Coxes of the world. I'm not talking about real rock stars that became wonderful scientists, but a whole lot of other people who we work hard to celebrate, so that they do inspire the teenagers. And we haven't even really tried hard to do that. And you know, look, I won't go on and on, because you know, at the end of the day, I'm wasting time. But what I will say is that it starts by recognizing that it's a very serious issue. And I am the classic case where at the end of the day, I chose commerce and law, and I really regret choosing commerce. I should have done science and law. No, I've regretted that for 40 years. And funnily enough, and I've used my life since university to make up for the science bit by delving into all sorts of things that I'm not qualified to do.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I raise this because I know it's a big elephant problem to solve, but I think one of the things we could do is actually have a program. We could actually have the equivalent of a TV program that celebrates invention.
Roger, I'm going to put a challenge to you. We'll have a chat offline, and we'll look at doing a special panel dedicated to this exact opportunity. I won't call it a problem, I'll call it an opportunity. Because you won't get any argument from me. It's something that I've been banging on about forever. I've always been the champion around innovation, entrepreneurship, invention, creating things, creating the next opportunity, celebrating opportunity, celebrating success. That's got to be our future. That's got to be where Victoria goes. So
Yep.
you and I will have that conversation offline, if that's
I'd
okay.
appreciate that, David.
Thank you. I've got two more questions, and I'm conscious of the time. I never thought that my son would want to do this, but my son's actually come on for a question. Tyler, off you go, buddy.
Can you hear me? So hi, Simon. We obviously spoke a lot about how nothing beats an on-campus experience, and especially I'll speak on behalf of all first years. People like me were about to finish a first year of uni without having actually stepped foot on campus. So I guess while this year was very challenging and I guess a bit of a write-off in terms of getting the whole campus experience and everything, how do you see uni next year in a potential COVID normal? Is there a place for full campuses? There's obviously no guarantee for a vaccine, I guess, by the start of next year. So how do you predict uni will function before that vaccine period next year starting? And it's also relevant to people like Patrick who'll be starting next year. And then it's a two-parter. So the second bit is for also first years that missed out on a lot of that orientation this year. How's that going to be incorporated when we eventually do get back on campus?
Yeah, look, great question, Tyler. The toughest of questions, and but let me just say before I forget, look, my apologies for the year that you have missed this year. I hope you can make it up in the coming years, but what can I say? You have been denied something that's a rite of passage for for generations that have gone before you. Let me say this, we're right in a really important moment right now, and I'm talking about Greater Melbourne, okay? So I'm not talking about, Brisbane or Perth or anything like that. Many of us listened to the announcement yesterday from the Premier. Where do we go from here? The case numbers are incredibly low. We ought to feel pretty damn good, but we've got to, obviously, as a society, remain compliant and do the right thing so that those numbers stay down. Now, my hope, and it's a hope at this point, there's no university decision backing what I'm about to say, because actually that all happens over the next 2 to 3 months. And it's absolutely conditional on not only sensible decisions coming from the state government, but a continuation of this. The way I'm going to define it is the numbers are so low that they do not cause any crisis in our health system. Okay, so it's not obliteration, it's not eradication. It's just that we have a health system which is not stretched. Assuming that can be the case, and it's not so much a big assumption, it's just an incredibly important assumption. We're seeing what's happened in Europe at the moment, and I can tell you that there are some very worried state leaders in various European nations, seriously worried as they go into their winter. My hope is that we've learned our big lesson here, and as a broader community, we resolve firmly, no going back. Whatever it takes, we're going to try and keep going. It won't be naught every day. This bloody thing will keep, like cauliflower, just coming up every now and then all over the place. But hopefully in very small numbers and manageable with our health sector. If that is right, I think that populations back on universities can happen next year. And that my hope is that rather than a whole lot of really difficult and frankly silly rules, that there are 2 or 3 very simple rules, largely around social distancing, masks, stuff that everyone knows is sensible and will have to be policed strongly. That's the first bit. The second bit, again, we're in this era at the moment, the next couple of months, 3 months, where we may get an awful lot of visibility, positive visibility, about the rollout of a vaccine later next year. And assuming that we can remain compliant and keep the thing under control until that vaccine starts to be dished out. Unfortunately, university students are not going to be in the front of the line. There's going to be a whole lot of other more needy people that need to get that vaccine first. So we'll have to be patient. But, my hope is over the next year or two, we start with relative normality as at the beginning of next year. That's the best case possible. And I think as of today, it is possible. And then it simply gets better as we go further into next year with the possibility of a vaccine towards the end of the year. Big decisions have to be made over the next 2 or 3 months, absolutely dependent on the experience of the last few days continuing. So there's some really big ifs, but let me tell you, everyone up the top of a university is trying their hearts out to make sure that that can be the offering for next year. No one wants to have a second year of this.
Brilliant.
David, can I jump in there just for a minute?
Yep.
I hear what you're both saying, and I totally agree. The pragmatism is we need to get Tyler on campus as quickly as possible. If for no other reason, just look at the look on Dave's face. He's tired. He's had enough. But for me, the reality as a futurist, not as a father or a pragmatist, as a futurist is I don't want us to go back to normal. I don't. I want us to learn these lessons. I don't want university to go back exactly as it was before. We've seen it. We've seen how beautifully blended education can work. We've seen that we can distribute education. Let's start to take the lessons we've learned now and slowly infiltrate them into what we give our students going back from the first day they go back. Let's not go back to this old version of what it is and say, well, once that's all settled down, we'll look at it again. I can tell you, having been in the industry as you have for 30 or 40 years, we won't. If we go back and use everything we did before in this new world, that's exactly where we'll stick, and this will all have been a waste. So yes, let's get them back on campus as quickly as possible, but please, let's start looking forward. Let's see what a new education, a new experience can be.
Yeah. Speaking as a father, I know, or not as a father, but probably somebody that remembers the good old days. I know what Tyler wants more than ever, and that is his O week back. That's all. He just wants to meet some mates.
Yeah.
Or face-to-face those that he's been meeting virtually. I might just go to one last question, if we could, and then a sum up. Timothy.
Hi all, thanks for giving us the time, spending some time to talk to us tonight. I've got a question for both Morris and Simon. As technologies are being developed, such as AI, cybersecurity, and biotech, just to name a couple of few, are rapidly developing, what can universities like Monash and other institutions can do to integrate topics like ethics, philosophy, and other liberal arts into the courses? Mainly because, like in my current degree, I'm just doing IT, and like I've only just got units based in IT and just business, and there's not enough to broaden in an individual's horizon outside of those two. Yeah.
So for me, to use the glib statement, full steam ahead. I mean, I talked about that before. The reality is that's exactly why I think we need STEAM and not STEM. We need to bring the arts in. That what you will learn is terrific skills. You will learn the ability to be able to manipulate technology at your will, and you will do that in whatever way is relevant to the time and space you do it. In my time 30 years ago, it was literally punch cards. Timothy, what's a punch card? I'm not putting you on the spot, but you wouldn't know and you wouldn't know how to operate it, neither would I anymore. The reality is technology will evolve, but what we need to evolve that technology is exactly the answer to the question you've just asked: human ingenuity, creativity. We need to tilt at windmills, which is why, to me, every university qualification, tertiary qualification, everything we do moving forward has to be, yes, let's teach the pragmatic needs of that individual, but let's also teach them to question what we've taught them.
Excellent.
Timothy, Timothy, can I just ask, where are you up to in your journey? What are you doing this year?
I'm just coming out of third year of my IT degree.
Fantastic.
So I'm just based at the faculty.
You must know something about me, because the question you've asked is one of the most passionate, the things I'm most passionate about. As a university chancellor, in a normal year, I go to dozens of graduation ceremonies. There's only one faculty that stands out in relation to one part of that graduation ceremony, and that's the medicine faculty. Why? Because they recite, the hundreds that are about to graduate, they recite together the Hippocratic Oath. I have failed so far in my 5 years as chancellor to encourage other faculties to develop their own Hippocratic oaths. And let me assure you, I come from the finance sector. We need a Hippocratic oath. Well, we've actually established a thing called the Banking and Finance Oath a few years ago. Far too late. We're getting there. But every vocation needs an oath around good behaviours. You know, I'm on the board of Rio-Tinto. We blew up some caves that have been occupied for 46,000 years. How stupid, how inexcusable. Why? Not because our policies were bad, not because we had brilliant managers here and there, but simply because we had behavioural issues that were not perfect through the organisation. We had a Royal Commission, again, into banking and finance, not because the most perfect pieces of paper were in every bank telling people what to do, but the behaviours, the ethics simply weren't what they ought to be. And Timothy, all I can say is the earlier we start talking about this seriously, namely with students, into high schools, please, because I've got to say, as an old person, there is nothing more important. Give me a resource who knows how to behave, and I will take that person time and time again, versus someone who doesn't know how to behave but got 10 out of 10 in some technical pursuit. The cost of misbehaviour is simply too great nowadays, and we expose them every day of the week through the technologies we have nowadays. So you can't get away with it. And I want you to keep asking that question, because we're actually underdone.
Thank you so much, Timothy. Best of luck with your studies as well. I'm going to finish with one last little question, a quick one for each of you, and I'm going to put you on the spot. So let's fast forward 10 years from now. 10 years from now, we're through all of this stuff. Hopefully people have forgotten, you know, COVID, and we've moved Victoria well and truly forward. You were advising the Premier, or maybe you are the Premier, and you had to put on a license plate on the front of every car. Maybe we'll be flying drones and not cars. A slogan, and that slogan would describe the vision or what Victoria is known for. And we've had in the past Garden State and Education State. I think what we've got now. What would be your slogan for Victoria in 10 years' time? And I know I'm putting you on the spot.
You want to go first, Morris?
Morris? Yeah, absolutely.
You're the
I'll
futurist.
give you top of mind. I put down think different.
Okay. Good.
The way I'm going to answer it is that, and I'm answering it through a young person's eyes, or I'm trying to be young. I think the world does look very scary and challenging and confronting, fast-moving, etc., etc. And I'm going to go to something that I might be criticised for being a bit soft, but I want this state to be a caring state.
Yeah. You must be reading into my heart as well, because that's exactly where I want to spend a number of my time going forward, is putting the heart back into a lot of the things that we do. And certainly, you know, my politics is always been, you know, strong in terms of liberal, but my grounding is all about a heart and a soul. And we are known a lot as liberals in terms of managing strong economies and ensuring that we do things sensibly, and we put people front of mind. But we've got to ensure that we do it with a heart and a soul, and that's where I'll be spending the rest of my political career going forward. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. This has been an unbelievable conversation. I think we could have gone for hours. Simon, best of luck. You've got some really interesting challenges ahead with Monash, and obviously the number of boards and many other things that I'm sure you will do going forward. And we look forward to watching that and supporting you in whatever way that we can. And thank you for what you do in terms of education. Thank you to the lecturers and the management team at Monash University. We're very proud to have Monash University in our backyard here at Caulfield, and we wish you well into the future. And thank you to you also, Morris. You provide some really interesting insight and an important outlook on things that are full of hope and are full of a future that hopefully will take us on a journey that we can all embrace and share and enjoy and hopefully be fruitful in terms of our life ahead. So to both of you, thank you very much. To all of the participants, thank you for joining us. This forms part of a very interesting series, as I've said, Next week's discussion, we're going to bring that up on the screen, which will be something that we welcome you all next Monday at 7 o'clock. Please join us for a discussion that will be around what now, what next, a major events and tourism-led recovery. So we are going to talk with Earl Eddings, Chairman of Cricket Australia. We are just going into the cricket season, and maybe we'll certainly, I'm sure Earl will have a whole lot of insight for us there. Marnie Fetcher from Netball Australia, and I've got here my Vixen scarf. I haven't taken it out of the packet yet, but it'll be interesting to hear from Marnie and Dr. Jeremy Johnson, AM Chair of Tourism, Restart Task Force. So Jeremy will be able to talk specifically about the tourism industry and how we'll be able to go forward with all of that. Very, very interesting conversation. Could I thank you all? This period is obviously very challenging for everybody out there. And as I say always, if there is anything my office can do, if there's any help that you need or need to be pointed in the direction for anything going forward, please don't hesitate to contact my office and we'll do the very best we can to help you. Thank you to all of the participants that have joined us tonight. Thank you once again to Simon. Thank you to Morris. Thank you all. Good night.